Hi everybody, it's Fantasy Author's Handbook again. Phil here. Okay, so this video is just going to be a book haul. It was just going to be stuff that I found at my local library that has this little front part that has a kind of ongoing book sale, and you just scan a little QR code and pay by Venmo. I never go to the library without pausing there, and I almost always come back with some books. And this day I was surprised to find a lot of new science fiction paperbacks. Somebody had, sort of dropped maybe 10 or 11 books that I started to grab. And as I'm standing there with some of these books in my hand and kind of scanning through the rest of what they had to offer, this lady came out, just kind of appeared from nowhere, and said, "Oh, are you buying those?" And I thought, yeah, oh yeah, and we started talking. Oh, I always look at these, and if there's any science fiction, fantasy, I tend to be the guy who grabs it. She's like, "I noticed that those go really quick." And I said, "It's probably usually me." She said, "Well, I have a bunch more in the back if you want to take a look at them, and yeah, I can bring them out." I was like, right. So she brought out another little stack of books, not lots, right? I mean, it was like 10 or 15, maybe at the most, and kind of put them in my hand. She said, "Listen, just sort of grab whatever you want, and then if whatever you don't want, just put back up on the shelf." And I was like, "Okay, great." And then she left. She walked out with her daughter. And I'm standing there with this stack of books in my hand that was completely dominated by Conan. And I bought a bunch more books, different science fiction and fantasy books that were there too. But when I got home, I realized, wait a minute, there's 11 of these. And these were the books that I remembered reading as a kid, really as a high school kid, or even middle school kid. And they were kind of all different. They were from different, periods of that series, from different publishers and so on over the course of years. And I was really excited about them. There's actually 11 that I got in that from that library sale for $1 each. And there's actually 12 in the series. So I have now, all of a sudden, I have 11 of a 12-book series. And these were books that I read, not all of them, but several of them back in the day, and I mean a really long time ago. So as I was starting to put this together and think, well, I'm going to do this fun little book haul about that, I couldn't not do something more about Conan. Because you're looking at the original Conan fan. Well, one of the original Conan fans. Or anyway, one of the sort of third wave, well, you know what I mean. You know what Conan means to me? He was my introduction to fantasy. When I was a kid, and I'm talking about 9, 10, 11 years old, so way back in the dark ages, I was reading Marvel comics like a crazy person, especially Fantastic Four. Huge Fantastic Four fan. Bought every Fantastic Four comic book as it came out. Just crazy for the Fantastic Four. One of the things that Marvel was always really good about was kind of self-promotion, And on the bottom of pages of comic books, as you're reading along, they would sort of tease little, what was happening in other things. Daredevil meets the Kingpin in issue number whatever. And along the bottom, I kept seeing mention of this Conan. And I think I pronounced it Conan back then because I didn't even know what the heck this was. And one mention. And then at one point I ran across, again at the public library, they had this comic book exchange where this box people could leave. It was kind of a little free library version of for comic books. That again, in this time period, people weren't really taking seriously as like, well, these things are going to be worth money someday or anything like that. And I was like, that's that guy Conan the Barbarian that people keep talking about, and here is what I grabbed out of that box, and have had ever since. And we're talking about, I don't know, right? This book was published in 1973. I probably got it maybe 4 years after that, 5 years after that at the most. No, sooner than that. This I probably came into my hands in 75, 76. So it's that old, I've been holding on to this. It's normally in a plastic bag with a board. This is King Size Conan, the Barbarian #1, again from 1973. The artist there is Barry Windsor Smith, who we'll talk about the other great Conan artists in this video, I promise. But in terms of the comic books, Barry Windsor Smith was the absolute king of the Conan comic books. And just kind of flipping through this, it's got 2 stories, The Lair of the Beastmen and Tower of the Elephant, which was, the Tower of the Elephant was based on a Robert E. Howard story. And one of the things that these were brought to Marvel Comics by Roy Thomas, who I think is one of the 3 or 4 great champions of Conan. That's the character originally created back in the 30s by the author Robert E. Howard, one of the great pulp authors of all time, and one of the originators of the sword and sorcery genre in general, and just a sort of modern new take on the fantasy hero. This thing blew my mind, yeah. And from here I started picking up, not as the sort of convenience store where I bought comic at that time on a spinner rack. We didn't have comic book stores where I lived at all. Didn't really normally stock Conan. It was, Spider-Man, and then X-Men started to get popular again, and then, the sort of mainline Marvel titles, and then mixed in with the DC stuff that I was ignoring at the time. So they were kind of hard to get. So you'll see me flipping through a few of the other issues that I've gotten over, in various ways over the years and have kept. But this was really how I became a fantasy fan. And from there, because Roy Thomas was always really good about crediting Robert E. Howard through everything, and you can see that here if I can hold that up a little bit closer. So Robert E. Howard's name was always there. And I, of course, being inquisitive young Phil was like, who's this Robert E. Howard guy? This sounds really cool. Is there more of this? Are there actual stories? Are there books? What is this? So, of course, around that time, to on and off through years and years, I was a member of the Science Fiction Book Club. Voila. All of a sudden, there's a 3-volume set of Conan, not books. I thought they were novels at the time, and then saw that they were mostly short stories and a couple of novellas. These were just fantastic, right? I got these, read them voraciously. Red Nails, we'll talk about that. Oh, just pure love. And The People of the Black Circle. I'll manage my glare as best I can. And, of course, The Hour of the Dragon. Yeah, glare. So read all 3 of these just rapidly, collection of I think more or less all of the Conan stories. I quickly became a Conan fan and have stayed a Conan fan all along. I'm by stuff like this biography of Robert E. Howard. He did lead a fairly interesting life. And I'll kind of flip through this as well. See, there's like lots of glare from the camera. This great Conan book from DK, illustrated thing by Roy Thomas himself. I mean, this is one of those, I think if you saw my previous big book haul videos where I talked about Harlan Ellison, this is the other side of that, This was the author that just got me charged up on the entertainment value of fiction in general, and just how unbelievably fun it can be, and brought me into this life in fantasy. So how about that? So let's go from here, and we're going to talk about the actual books that I bought at the library, and this sort of uber Conan series from the late 60s that were published pretty much all the way through into the 80s, from at first Lancer books that kind of morphed then into Ace books here in the States, and were picked up by other publishers around the world. So here we go. We're going to get this Conan library book haul started. All right, everybody, here are the actual books in question from the library sale. And these were books that I have owned before in the past. Why do I not have them anymore? Oh, if I had just kept every single book I had ever bought. Basically, all through high school, you would find me and all of my friends, the whole D&D or the Strategic Games Club crew back in high school had and read all of these. This is the first one, simply called Conan, and why not? So this is the this is the slightly later Ace edition, Frank Frazetta cover. We're going to talk about Frank Frazetta in this. Frank Frazetta cover. These were actually numbered at this point. In various different incarnations of this series, they either were or weren't numbered. It looks like there were maybe even different orders to this, but just looking at the contents page, and mostly Conan existed as short stories. I think Howard really only wrote one novel, although a very short novel. Some novellas like Red Nails. This one includes The Tower of the Elephant, which is one of the great Conan stories by Robert E. Howard that you saw in that comic book that I showed you in King Size Conan #1. And, honestly, there were, in the sort of that modern era, all of these stories were written again in the 30s for mostly Weird Tales magazine. There were really three, I think, kind of uber champions of Conan and of Robert E. Howard. And the first we kind of talked about there with Roy Thomas, who brought him to Marvel Comics. And then the other two were Lynn Carter and L. Sprague de Camp, whose names you will see on the cover here and whose names you will see throughout the rest of this video, who were really the champions that sort of brought these books out and expanded on the Conan universe, taking up where Robert E. Howard left off and expanding stories that he had left unfinished and writing stories of their own, either together or separately. So this is Conan as told or by the original creator Robert E. Howard, and then picked up by these two champions who did so with this great respect for this character. So, normally I do get to be fairly protective of that kind of stuff, like, don't step on somebody else's thing. But they did it well, with a real respect for the character, for the source material. So here we go, right? #1, just plain Conan. #2, Conan of Samaria. We know that Conan is a Cimmerian. He comes from, is he the last of the Cimmerians? I don't know, question mark. This one includes the original Robert E. Howard story, The Veil of Lost Women, which you might have noticed in the comic books that I flipped through. Also has Queen of the Black Coast. Let's see if I can just kind of hold that up for you rather than read off all of these. But again, a mixture of Robert E. Howard himself from the old stories, and you can see how they're credited and everything properly back to the old magazines, and some combination of Lynn Carter or L. Sprague de Camp. Some really, really good stuff in here, including The Frost Giant's Daughter by Robert E. Howard. And what? Frank Frazetta art. Look at that. Spectacular. #3. Look at that. It looks different. Conan the Freebooter. This is the newer trade dress from 1982. Ace. This has the Boris cover, Boris Vallejo. And I think I might have, I had my finger over his signature there, which you can see if I hold it up closer to the camera. Another of the great fantasy illustrators from this time. This one being, sort of a newer version from this sort of series, which is the one that I was really buying at the time. Also includes some interior illustrations that are kind of cool. They're not credited. I have no idea who that artist was. They do look like they're maybe coming from the comics. They kind of have that sort of inked line drawing kind of comic thing, but super cool. Let's talk about that. Do I need to anyway, as a collector, have to have the same trade dress? Is it possible for someone to do number 1, number 2 that look the same, and then number 3 that looks completely different? Okay, so there is a part of me that is that collector who's going to be, no, they all have to be exactly the same. They have to be on the shelf in this sort of perfect order. In this case, you know what? No. I'm going to go ahead and celebrate the fact that these all came to me, 11 of the 12 books, all in one big chunk for $1 each at the library, and just love these books and keep them in, and be able not only just to sort of settle for that, but to say, wow, right? I mean, I'm seeing a different version of this. We get to see how these developed over the years, or just were kind of different. No cover copy on the back of this one. We're just repeating the same Boris painting, and if you've got this kind of great, cool Boris painting, why not repeat it? So I'm just considering myself lucky that they're all here. They all came to me at the same time. And again, right, this is me talking. There are some things that I get very obsessive about. My Ace Doubles collection, you can see behind me, and so on. But for me, 99.9% of the time, it's about the content. And so now I have all but one of the 12 original Conan series books. That's all I care about, right? The trade dress does not matter. So the next one, where are we? Number 4. Speaking of different trade dresses, here's a third one already. This is actually the oldest of these. This is the Old Lancer edition. This is the original from 1968 when these first started coming back out. Cover art by John Duilo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Kind of doesn't really stand up to Frazetta and Boris, no. With all due respect, but who does? We're going to talk about Frazetta in more detail, but Frazetta, Boris are up there in the great pantheon of artists. But anyway, here it is, Conan the Adventurer. You also will notice, too, that for the most part, the actual guts of the books remained exactly the same. They just put a new cover on it, so you're going to have a contents page that might look different. This is a Lancer as opposed to Ace, so they're going to have some differences in there just as time goes by. They all include the same map by P. Schuyler Miller, right? Another of the great, sort of Conan champions behind the scenes. And an introduction by Elsbreg de Camp, I believe. Yes. And I think the introduction is the same in all of them. And then you just sort of get into the actual stories themselves. Black Tears. This one, Conan the Wanderer, does include Shadows in Zambula, The Devil in Iron, and The Flame Knife by Robert E. Howard, although the third one was by Howard and then finished by DeCamp. So we're still mining the original Weird Tales stories by Howard himself. Would I prefer to have this with the likes of Frazetta art? Whatever. No, you know what? It's about, look, I've got a sampling of various editions of this great series. I think that's actually really cool. So Conan the Wanderer, a keeper. That was number 4. Number 5. This one is not numbered. That they have been numbered, right? There's a nice big 4 on the top of this one. There's a 3 just right between there, and so on. These, by this time, the Ace books were all numbered up in the upper right-hand corner. This one is not numbered, but it is indeed number 5, Conan the Adventurer. This is now it's our 4th different trade dress. This is I'm looking down at my notes. This is the older Lancer edition, 1972, with the purple sprayed edges because they just did that. I don't know, but it's cool. And the just ridiculously classic, mega classic, classic in all caps, Frazetta cover. That is just absolutely Conan right there. This one, if you can see, if I can hold it up close enough, actually presents itself as book one of the complete Conan. So I don't know, right? Maybe a little bit more research required there. And was there a different order to this series when it was published by Lancer in this particular trade dress? I don't know. But content-wise, this is completely unassailable. It includes one of the absolute great classic Robert E. Howard Conan stories, The People of the Black Circle. 100% a keeper. It's just everything good about this. It is Conan the Adventurer. Gets us already to number 6. Conan the Buccaneer, the Ace 1977 edition. Again, these are the books that I bought in the bookstore at the time. In this Conan, and then the whatever, right? That was a series kind of title decision that they made. It's Conan the something or Conan of something. This is Conan the Buccaneer. What do we know about this? It's another classic Frazetta cover, first of all, right? Fantastic. Conan just wading into battle against like literally everybody. This is actually not written by Robert E. Howard at all. This is a complete novel, Conan the Wanderer, by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. So for the contents page is actually the chapter titles. And has, kind of missing it has the map, it's missing the introductory stuff. But with an introduction by Lynn Carter. So again, really, they're digging into what is this, who is this guy, where do we fit into this, and so on. And they just sat down and wrote a novel together. So I don't think I've ever read this one. So looking forward to it. Conan the Buccaneer, number 6 of 12. Back to this trade dress here, the older Lancer, number 7, Conan the Warrior. This is 1972 again. Got those weird purple sprayed edges. This one's been through some sun damage there, right? Some fading. Keep your books out of direct sunlight if you can. But, anyway, here it is. And it's beautiful. This one, very excited, because this includes my favorite Conan story, and really, seriously, one of my favorite fantasy stories, fantasy novellas, whatever you want to call it, of all time, Red Nails, which I used to have a comic book adaptation of back in the day. Where did that go? I don't know. It's driving me crazy. Drawn by Barry Windsor Smith again. It's fantastic. This story is just one of the best of all time. It was originally serialized in Weird Tales back in 1936, over the course of 4 parts through July through October of 36. It is the Conan must-read as far as I'm concerned. Look at that. Great, right? And again, numbered, front and center, Conan the Warrior. Wow. That gets us to number 8, Conan the Usurper. This one I definitely had, and I had it in this trade dress, this edition from Ace, back in the day, back when I was probably in junior high. I remember it distinctly because it forced me to go to the dictionary and look up the word usurper. Right? So who says that old sword and sorcery adventure fiction can't be educational? Of course it can. Everything can be educational. So anyway, it turns out that I already had a copy of this back in my big giant stack of fantasy and science fiction, etc. paperbacks. There it is. An older edition, the older Lancer edition. Otherwise, inside the same book. I'm going to keep this one that I got from the library because it is definitely the edition that I owned as a kid and read. So this one I will kind of pass on, which is not in great condition. I don't normally get super nuts about condition, but this definitely has some rough condition issues. A lot of fading on that purple sprayed edges, but still, right, shares the same spectacular Frank Frazetta cover art. Conan versus the giant snake. Spectacular. Conan. The Usurper, number 8. I'm leaning in. Hi, everybody. What's up? Number 9. This is switching. I don't know. Have I lost count? It's like maybe the 5th different trade dress. This is actually the UK Sphere edition. We're seeing that in the camera. Again, like Frazetta, super uber classic here. You know you've seen this image all over the place. I'm just going to zoom in. Oh, so fantastic. Just great. This is actually an alternate title for Robert E. Howard's only full-length Conan novel, The Hour of the Dragon. And this is another one that I have already. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a big sucker for ace doubles. And in fact, this is one of the earliest ace doubles that I have, and one of the earliest ace science fiction doubles that were published. 1953, Conan the Conqueror. And on the other side, The Sword of Rhiannon by Lee Brackett. You know, first of all, how cool is this book? Like, just crazy. But this gives me an opportunity here, right, to talk about Frank Frazetta and what he actually meant to the fantasy art world. Take a look at both of these together, right? 1953, or as opposed to, this is a 1975 book there, the newer one, right? Look at the difference in the art there. And you can tell here, even with the great editor Donald Wollheim at the helm of these ace doubles, how you've got illustrators struggling with what even is this? What is this guy supposed to actually look like? And so maybe reading the story or reading parts of the story and thinking, they've got like swords and stuff, so what is this, like ancient Rome, I guess, or something? So we'll go with that. And it was all just kind of historical sources that, frankly, if you read the story, really makes no sense at all. And then you get Frazetta, who just goes and kicks it up about 500 million notches and invents what we know of as fantasy art now, right? Fantasy art, when we don't even know what that is exactly, I guess he's kind of like this guy or whatever from Rome. And then I'm just taking this into completely new worlds of crazy awesomeness. This was Frank Frazetta. I don't think that there's a single fantasy illustrator out there in the world who doesn't owe a huge debt of gratitude to Frazetta, who isn't influenced by Frazetta. I have this book, Frazetta book cover art, which is so cool. And made cooler still by the fact that I've got a lot of these books in my collection, including this one that we just looked at, Conan the Conqueror. I'll take the little post-it off. There he is. And, you know, flipping through this book, which is a must-have for any Conan fan, any Frazetta fan, any fantasy book fan. You see more of these Conans there. I'm having trouble holding this up and not dropping it and ripping it, which would be a tragedy, right? But these are obviously showcased here, and why wouldn't they be in a book where we're seeing fantasy art, the likes of which clearly no one had seen before. Every one of the great pantheon of fantasy illustrators owes huge debt of gratitude to this guy who just saw through into the fantasy worlds. Frank Frazetta, as much a star of these Conan books that I've got than as Robert E. Howard himself, or certainly Elsbreg de Camp or Lynn Carter or anybody else associated with it. There's no way that those covers didn't pull lots of young people like myself into those books. So Frank Frazetta, wow, one of the greatest of all time. T-shirt from T Public, by the way, not a sponsor, but should be. What's Up, TeePublic? We're almost there. We're almost at the end. This is, where are we now? I've lost track. It's number 10. Conan the Avenger. This is the 1982 third printing, Ace, in that fantastic original livery. But weirdly enough, and what caused me that momentary confusion, the number box in the top right-hand corner is missing. Consistency, people. Consistency is important. This is actually no Robert E. Howard in here at all. This is a novel by Bjorn Nyberg and Elsprague de Camp. This might be kind of a fix-up novel. Parts of it were originally published as Conan the Victorious, I guess, in a magazine called Fantastic Universe. I don't know. Back in 1957. So, but this actually shows that de Camp was actually really working the Conan angle back into the mid to late 50s before these ended up being put together into these collections starting in 68. But anyway, this is, what's interesting is that inside here, it is a novel called The Return of Conan by Nyberg and de Camp. But on the outside, so it's a novel that is contained inside the book Conan the Avenger, which obviously, as we said, consistency, right, is important. So it has the Conan the or Conan of. But anyway, Conan the Avenger contains the novel The Return of Conan by Bjorn Nyberg and Elsprague de Camp. There we are. Okay, so that brings us to number 11 that I'm missing. That's the only one that wasn't included there that I didn't have already. It's called Conan of Aquilonia. We'll put it here. It shouldn't be impossible for me to find, especially since now have established that I kind of don't care which edition it is, as long as it's a mass market paperback that will sit with these. So whatever I find out there in the world, in the used book marketplace, it's on my phone, on my list of books to search for. I will find it. It won't be that hard. I will have the full set soon. But going back to the last of the books that were in this library book haul, Conan of the Isles. I'm having some glare issues here, but what the heck. This is the 7th printing, probably 1982. So the fact that this had 7 printings shows you that these were popular. I was not the only young fantasy, by this time D&D nerd, buying these things. We're out there. We're all out there. The geeks shall inherit the earth, people. You've seen it happening. You're seeing it happen. It's happening. This is a Boris cover. This is another full-length novel, this one by Elsprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. That apparently is just called Conan of the Isles. It doesn't have a story inside of it. Right. You know, I have mixed feelings about chapter titles. Right. Voyage on an Unknown Sea. So looking forward to that, right? I mean, again, these two really understood Conan, really were a champion of the character and of Robert E. Howard's writing, and they have done both Conan and his creator justice. So that's it for this series of 12 Conan books. But of course, you know, there's more. There's always more. I found this when I was searching through the big pile of books for that copy of Conan the Usurper. Conan and the Spider God. By who is this? Well, by Elsprague de Camp, of course. And of course, after these 12 books were published and were popular, different publishers, this is Bantam, started to sort of jump on the Conan bandwagon there and publishing what I'm seeing out there in the world are calling the Conan pastiche books, which were just sort of give me a fantasy author and take this character and just go crazy. Conan versus a giant spider, I'm 100% in on this, of course. When I saw that, I was just like, oh yes, I'm buying that, so I did. But these Conan pastiches went on for really quite a while, and all the way starting in 1978 and going through really 2006. I'm frankly more surprised that they're not still being published out there. Looking at my notes here, sorry. The list of authors who ended up writing a Conan novel is just crazy, right? Poul Anderson, Harry Turtledove, uh, Robert Jordan, who didn't eventually buy this, right? Probably on the remainder shelf. He wrote three of them: Conan the Magnificent, Conan the Triumphant, and Conan the Victorious. Cool wrap cover. Republished by Tor, of course, after Robert Jordan became, the Wheel of Time guy, and really successful. I've been sitting on this book for ages. I don't know why. I'm going to read this. I need to read this. Why not read this, right? Robert Jordan, Conan. So, those authors, he actually included some of the TSR and Wizards of the Coast alumni. Richard Knack, Roland Green, who I worked with at TSR, and Lauren Coleman, who wrote some earlier Magic stuff for Wizards of the Coast. So there's more Conan out there. Am I going to collect all of these sort of Conan pastiche novels and eventually have all of them? Do you know me at all? Do you even know me at all? Of course I'm going to get them all. It's not going to be high priority number one, right? I'm not going to go out there and try to spend, $300 on eBay to get them all or something like that. But they're on my radar now. Anything with Conan in the title, it gets bought. I'm back into Conan 100%. Because really, honestly, so it's, as I'm recording this, it's November 2023. How did people get into fantasy now, right? Or since really there was an understanding of fantasy as a genre? I think there's still probably the big three, fantasy entry points. The Lord of the Rings, or The Hobbit, and then The Lord of the Rings is still the thing that pulls people in. Dungeons and Dragons is based on, amongst other sources in that pulp era, Conan and the writings of Robert E. Howard in particular, and Fritz Leiber and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, etc. D&D is an entryway to a lot of fantasy fans now, and is starting really in the late 70s when I first started playing it, all the way through to right now. This is D&D is a place where people discover fantasy and move on from there, or expand from there. And then, of course, Harry Potter, which was the gigantic explosion of here's fantasy for young readers that just turned literally millions of people into fantasy fans instantaneously. But I think I'm not alone out there still. Maybe we have more gray in our beard than we used to, and other changes. But Conan was an entry point to fantasy for a lot of people. And I will credit Roy Thomas and Marvel Comics for making that happen, for really primarily. It was there, and then those Ace or Lancer and Ace books that we saw started to be published really concurrent with that or after that. So Conan, thank you. Robert E. Howard, thank you. Roy Thomas, thank you. Lynn Carter, Elsbreg de Camp, thank you for getting me into literally a life of fantasy. And thank you for watching. And listen, how did you come into the fantasy genre? Was it Harry Potter? Was it D&D? Was it who? What? The Lord of the Rings? Maybe? Was it Conan? I don't know. Comment below. You can comment below. And of course, this is YouTube, so I've got to end with like. It's this button. Subscribe, because why are you not subscribed? If you're not subscribed, then you're not going to see the next video, which is the rest of that library book haul, which has got some amazing stuff in there. This Conan thing really overwhelmed me a little bit, but there's some great books in there. Another eBay book haul coming after that. And then, of course, a lot more stuff about writing, fantasy, science fiction, horror, books, book collecting, publishing, the whole banana. Like everybody, subscribe, and share. Use this video, say like, hey man, he's right, Conan is great. Throw that out into social media for me, please. Share, like, comment, subscribe by Crom. I will see you again soon. This I swear.